Hello everyone and welcome back to another podcast episode from me, Andrew Porteous, your host, and this is the University Support and Success podcast. Now, today we are talking about a slightly different topic than last time. So last episode we were talking about confidence, self-esteem, all that fun stuff, and today we are taking a slightly different note and talking about a topic that's quite close to my beliefs and understandings, which is depression. But enough about what we're doing. Please make sure to like, rate, review, subscribe, share, whatever you can do on whatever platform you're using to make sure that people can see what we're doing and how we're doing it. Obviously, as you can tell, I am in a different location. You're welcome. It looks a bit better than my last one. But today we are joined by Kay Downie. I'm just going to give you a little intro of what Kay does. So Kay is a qualified tarot reader, kinetic shift practitioner, NLP practitioner or coach, and using her many years of experience with these skills and drawing on her own life experiences, she enables and empowers her clients at Kay Downie, the Soul Mechanic, to be their more authentic self. Now, obviously, welcome to the podcast. I think, is this your first time on a podcast, Kay?
No, actually, Andrew, it isn't. I've been on a couple before, but this is the first time that I'm here with you.
Lovely. So you are like, I love it. I do love doing podcasts. They're quite fun. Running my own is actually brilliant because I'm a control freak. We all know this. But one of the questions I kind of have, I know a lot of the listeners, if they know me enough, will know what NLP is. Ask about first was kinetic shift. Tarot is very well known, very misunderstood, but very well known. But the one I wanted to ask,
that's one of my favourite tools.
What is it?
It's very unknown, actually. Very few people know what it is, but it's magic in my toolbox, is the way I describe it. It was devised by a gentleman called Carl Smith, and Carl had PTSD. And he found that NLP, shamanism, colour therapy, hypnotherapy, all the bits and bobs that we all know about, he found that a little bit of each of them worked. But he didn't find that one of them cured him, so he put them all together and came up with kinetic shift. And he no longer has PTSD, and neither do the clients that come to me with PTSD have PTSD anymore. So that's how it came about. So it's... Go on.
Oh no, I'm gobsmacked.
It's basically colour therapy and hypnotherapy that's used most. The hypnotherapy is obviously the way that you're talking to the clients in the same way that you use a hypnotic sort of voice when we use NLP. And NLP is used in it because we anchor things. But it's mainly colour therapy and the patient's imagination.
Oh, wow. So, obviously, explaining slightly about kinetic shift being that combination of the different practices, how would you go about doing it? Because that's the bit that kind of confuses me, I guess.
Well, the main thing is the client's imagination. The client has to be prepared to use their imagination. And that doesn't mean to say they've got to be able to picture things, but they have to use their imagination. And what happens is they go back to the time whenever the trauma or whatever happened. And the nice thing about kinetic shift is they don't have to tell me what happened to them. They can go back to the time that it happened or the time that they can remember feeling the way that they feel. And they can momentarily put themselves in that situation with their imagination and give the feeling a colour, so that they then bring that colour back to me and let that feeling go. And that's what we work on. I talk to them about what colour is the colour. I mean, they could come back and say it's yellow. No, there's sunshine yellow, there's sunflower yellow, there's primrose yellow, there's lots of different yellows. So we work out what colour yellow it actually is. How dense is that colour? Is it, from 0 to 10, with 10 being the densest, which is the denser. And then they go on a little journey. They imagine that they can go around the inside of their body. And as they're going round their body, they look for this colour and tell me where it's seated. Now, they may not be able to see the colour, but they can sense where it's seated normally. And then we work on pulling it out. Now, if they come face to face with me, I will do the pulling out. If they're on Zoom, they have to do it themselves. Or if it's in a position where they can't do it themselves, they have to imagine me doing it. And we pull the colour out, and it does come out, and they actually feel it coming out, strangely enough. Once it's out, they then go back to a time when they're extremely happy. Again, they feel how they felt at that time and give that a colour. Only this time, when they come back and give me the colour, I'm not going to go and get them to go and find where it is in their body. I'm going to put it back into their body to fill those nooks and crannies that we made by pulling the original colour out. Once they're full, from the tip of their heads to the tip of their fingers and toes, then we anchor it and they can go on their merry way. I normally find out what is wrong with my clients, what has caused them to come to me when they leave me a review, or when they start to they start telling me their life story at the end.
So, for the listeners and watchers that don't know, obviously me and Kay know each other from networking. So, is that the one? Would that explain like how Carl Ford from the accountancy, he came to you, and then after he told you that it solved a back issue?
Yes.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
And that's why he gave me that wonderful review, because I made him feel better. I made him feel taller.
But
he wasn't carrying so much weight around him. The back pain's gone, and he's back to being Carl.
But he never told you what was wrong?
No, Carl and I had a one-to-one. We talked about kinetic shift in the same way as we've just talked about it. And he just contacted me and said, I think I need a kinetic shift session, Kay. When can you fit me in? Fitted him in, did the kinetic shift, and you've seen the review.
Yeah, no, I've seen the review. Whoa.
So, as I said, it's the magic in my toolbox, Andrew. There's no other way of describing it. It's magic.
Blimey. So, obviously the purpose of getting you on the podcast was very much to delve almost into not just how you made the toolbox with a small link to what you like with what you do now, but obviously the lead up to it and why you needed the toolbox. Mm-hmm. So for anyone listening, we are going to be talking about depression and certain mental health issues. So if this is something that may trigger you, please do stop listening now. And there will be links in the comments directing you to anywhere you can get help, or message me. I'm always free to chat. But again, I am not a medical professional. But so when we had our little chat before recording, obviously you said about how you had depression, how you've overcome it, and how you overcame the setbacks that depression may have caused, and having that control. So we're going to dissect that slightly. And I think the reason I wanted to talk about this more is to open up that conversation and somewhat try and add to the ending of the stigma around mental health, which, to be fair, is what this podcast is about. It's about talking about things that happen in life that a lot of people go through, but society doesn't like you talking about it. And I think, and I found out recently, I can still call this a clean podcast, even if I swear. So I call that bullshit. You can talk about anything. I don't think society can have control over what you say, do, and whatnot. Obviously, it might not be acceptable to everyone, but if you want to say it, say it. So, to kind of flash back, where do you think the depression started, or those feelings started?
Well, as you've just mentioned, Andrew, we've met through networking, and I reviewed my life to find that out, to do a foresight, to tell my story. And it started when I was about 3 years old. My father was doing his national service, so was away most of my first 3 years of life. I'd built up a reasonable relationship with my mum. When I say reasonable, it was a fantastic relationship. She was always my best friend. But when my dad came home, things changed. I went from a happy, smiling little girl to a girl who never smiled. So I think that was probably the beginning of my depression. And it was purely because of the way that my dad treated me. So that's the beginning of my depression, way, way back then. But there's been lots of things in my life, as I'm happy to share with you tonight, what made it worse and what made it better.
So obviously I don't want to pull on it too much, but was it, so obviously I'm teacher, so I look at things like child protection, stuff like that. So in my head, the question I would have, and I wonder whether listeners and watchers would, was it emotional, physical, psychological?
It was emotional. It was emotional. My dad was very young. My dad was only 21 when I was born. So he was only, in his early or mid-20s and never had been a dad. And my mum had two older children than myself. And my dad was scared that my mum would think that he thought more of me than the other two children. Plus, he has told me since he wanted a little boy. And I happened to just be a little girl. So he set me goals. He set me things that he wanted me to do, but he never let me actually get to where he wanted me to be because he changed the goalposts. So consequently, I grew up feeling very unworthy, which obviously was the basis of my depression. And I also grew up feeling that my dad didn't love me.
Whoa. And to think that started at age 3, like most of the people that probably know me on this channel and on any of the episodes know that mine started later in life, probably about 5 or 6 years after that, I think. Like year 3 in school. I can't remember what age that is, which is bad.
The thing is, I mean, at the time, I didn't know I was depressed.
Yeah.
I was just told every time anybody seen me and wanted to take a photograph or anything was smile. And the more they told me to smile, the worse it was because the tighter my lips went.
Yeah, never
I was
tell
just
someone to smile unless it's like a school photo and they're like, smile for the camera. Like that you can take. But if it's just some random person that says, can you smile? No.
Yeah.
No, I cannot.
No. Now, you know me, I'm smiling all the time. But I was very, very serious, a very serious child. And, as I said, reviewing my life, it started way back then. Obviously, I didn't know I was depressed. I didn't know I was depressed until I had my first child. But there was things that I can relate that built up, and that's why that depression was there.
Yeah. I think that's the point we want to get across is you don't know it at that point.
No.
It's only when you review it. So, like, I didn't know that mine roughly started when I was bullied in school or when my grandparents died. So it's only on review. Like, I just thought, oh, my grandparents died, I'm upset. But yeah, so anyone listening, if you don't know, don't worry. But if you are feeling like upset or angry or anything of the sorts, do reach out to any of the links below or myself. Please do that because my inbox is always open on any platform. So following on from that, did that continue for most of your childhood?
It continued right through my childhood, right through my teens. And to make matters worse, when I was 18, my father told me not to bother to come home if I was going to see a certain person. I was 18. So what did I do? I never went home. I married the person and divorced the person 3 years later. Not because it didn't work out, but because my parents drip-fed me that it was the wrong thing that I'd done and I shouldn't have done it. And I suppose I was a people pleaser and I tried to placate them. I tried to do what they wanted me to do. I'd rebelled, but then I wanted to go back into the fold. And consequently, a few years later, that said gentleman drowned, which did not help my depression one little bit.
Oh gosh. Was it sorry, my mind went straight to, how did he drown?
Well, he drowned after going out drinking. He jumped into Pulteney Weirs and went for a swim. But unbeknownst to him, and unbeknownst to anybody else, he had a hole in the heart.
Oh.
So the cold water, the alcohol, and the hole in the heart all worked against him, because he was a very strong swimmer. A very strong swimmer. I mean, I'd remarried, and I will tell the truth, I was going to leave my husband and go back to my first husband, but it didn't work out because he died, and I wasn't allowed to grieve for him. I wasn't allowed to mention it at all. But it was there. He was my first love, if you like.
Yeah.
He was the first person that I married, and he was the person I wanted to be with, and he wanted to be with me. But the universe had different ideas. So along came my eldest, and it wasn't after his birth that I was diagnosed with depression. It was when he started school, because that baby became my life. I had that baby to fill that hole, and I was the only one who wanted him. So when he went off to school, it opened up that hole again, and the depression came out, and I was diagnosed as being depressed then.
So when your eldest was born, just so I get like a picture in my head, how, and I know you shouldn't ask a lady how old they were, but how old were you?
I was 25, Andrew.
Okay. It's not like I'm asking you how old you are now. I'm just to try and paint that picture.
I'm not ashamed of my age. I don't care about my age. It's just a number.
Yeah, but to think all of that, like the childhood, the teenage, young adult, and that early 20s, that was 22 years, and all of that happened.
Yeah.
And you think like people's journeys are so diverse, and you don't know the whole picture until you talk to someone about it. And I think that's what I'm loving about being able to do this podcast, is that I get to showcase people's stories. Not that I'm like thinking I get to, but like I get to see it first, and then I get to share it with people, because I love being that kind of person. But again, I think if I was to ask someone to talk about a topic like this 5 or so years ago, it wouldn't be allowed. Well, not allowed, but it wouldn't be accepted.
I actually did talk about it 5 or 6 years ago, because that was the whole reason I started networking. I'd gone to a speaking academy in Swansea, and the guy who was running it told me that this story that I'm telling you now needed to be in the public eye. And I answered him, I wouldn't have a clue how to. And he told me to go and join 4N and to do my story, to do the foresights. And now I can honestly say, hand on heart, I can talk about this, Andrew, without getting emotional, because that happened to a different person. That didn't happen to me. Yes, it did happen to me, but I'm not that same person.
Yeah.
And as my story unfolds, you know me as I am now, but you didn't know me as I was then. And I wasn't a very nice person.
Ooh.
Because I had quite a chip on my shoulder. And as much as I loved my baby, I shouted and I screamed. Partly because every time he cried, I got hit by his father. But I was determined that a baby needs a mum and a dad. So I stuck it out until my son was 7 years old. And I was then told that his father was his problem, because he was starting to have problems. So I told him I wanted a divorce, which nearly cost me and my son's life, because he tried to run us off the road twice. One evening, he waited for me to approach my house. I could see him. I knew I couldn't get from the car to the house for safety. So I went to find a policeman. Keynsham police station was closed because I was living in Bristol at the time, or I was living in Willsbridge, not actually in Bristol. So I went back to my hometown of Bath and left my ex-husband, because I'm no longer married to him, although I'm very happily married, in the arms of a police officer who told me to go home a very different way than what I'd come to Bath, so that my husband, or ex-husband, I was still married to him at the time, couldn't find me. They gave me time to get home. So that didn't help either.
No, and jeez.
Yeah. You don't know anybody until they start telling you their story, Andrew.
No, you really don't. But I'm trying to like compile in my head what to say next. So
I'll help you a little bit, because I went from that divorce. I thought it was just going to be me and my son. My son is now 8 years old, and I meet my wonderful husband, who I've now been married to for nearly 33 years. And we've got a beautiful daughter. When I met my husband, he had no idea about my depression because I put the mask on. And he knew my son had problems, because my son showed his problems on the first date that I took my son to meet him on. But he didn't know about mine until my daughter was born. When my daughter was born, I couldn't put that mask back on. Giving birth to her brought it up. And I went to see a different doctor than I'd seen before. And he helped me a lot. He sent me to a counsellor from Relate, and she kindly put everything into boxes and tied it all up with pink ribbons. And I was fine. My depression, as far as I was aware, had gone. I was beginning to live a normal life. I was beginning to enjoy my life. And then my son's school decided that the problems that my son was experiencing weren't actually caused by himself. They were caused by me, and sent me off to another counsellor who had an agenda, and opened every single box that the previous counsellor had closed. So I was put back to square one. And I lived with that depression from, my daughter was about 4 or 5, and I lived with it until my daughter was 13. And then I went down the spiritual pathway, found a self-awareness course, which started me off feeling better. And that's when the seeds of the Soul Mechanic was sown, only it wasn't called the Soul Mechanic. I was called Celtic Tarot. I started reading tarot cards as a sideline. And then a few years after doing that, somebody that I'd met told me that I was counselling when I was reading my tarot cards, and I needed to go and get some qualifications. Hence, I'm an NLP practitioner and coach on the basic level. And that is how I found out about Kinetic Shift. Now, my self-awareness course, my NLP course, I thought I'd really kicked my depression into touch, because I felt fine apart from an arthritic hip. Now, Kinetic Shift isn't magic enough to get rid of my arthritic hip, but it got rid of my depression. And my arthritic hip has never got any worse since that time. Obviously, it can't cure it, but it's stemmed it, as it were, unless I do silly things like drink acid-based wine or whatever. I can trigger it to be bad. And not unconsciously, obviously, nobody would set out to make themselves in pain, but it can still be triggered, but not through depression, just by doing stupid things. I could eat an orange or something like that
by living life
without thinking, and it could start it off. But Kinetic Shift cured my depression, and once it had gone, I started to enjoy life even more than I had started before. My daughter didn't like it. My daughter told me to go back to being like I was, because by that time she had found that because I screamed and shouted, I felt guilty, and she could use my guilt to make my answer of no, yes. So she did not like it, but she likes it now. She likes it. You know, she likes who I am now. And I really do enjoy my life now. I mean, I've been on some fantastic holidays and things with my husband, which he wouldn't have dared to take me on when I was in the middle of depression, because he never knew what I was going to do.
Wow. That's... Sorry, I'm like that child that, like, I appreciate that she was going to try and use the guilt.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure anyone who isn't an
Yeah, she
only,
tried. She really tried.
anyone who's not an only child, because I feel like only child, like children that are like the only child of their parents, somewhat get away with being cheeky anyway. But when you're the
Well,
youngest,
although she wasn't an only child, she was. She
yeah,
was, when you think about it. I've got two children, and both of them are only children because there's a 10-year gap between them.
yeah, yeah. I think where I luck out is anything that my parents would have done for my sister. I'm like, well, why aren't you doing it for me? And then I'd get away with it. It's very cheeky,
Yeah.
but it's the way children and parents interact, so we're all good. So, in terms of, and I don't think I've spoken about this publicly. Who have I? I've told people I went on it. So obviously I went on a spirited futures retreat, and I think that's where I can resonate, wrong word, resonate, with your like journey of finding that spiritual side and how it changes what you
Yeah.
feel, think, do. Because like I spent 3 days and I did qigong, meditation, constellations, and I'd love to be a constellation practitioner. I'm like looking into that. But and it is that once you spend that time on things like that, it does change. Like if anyone saw me a year ago from today, I'd be a very different person compared to what I learned and experienced in like November 2021.
Well, I met you first in real life, not on Zoom, in Birmingham.
Yes, in
And you're a very different young man
September.
today than you were when I met you in Birmingham. Definitely. I know we all change, but I think once we connect to that spiritual side and we can accept that we can only control certain things. We can't control everything, and we stop trying to control those things we can't control. We have a very different perspective on life, and life is so much easier. You know, as humans, we complicate life. As that spiritual being, we make things really simple.
Yeah. And I think something that probably not annoys, but may slightly bug some people is that obviously I've done this as a 24-year-old. So I've done it quite early, whereas a lot of
Yes.
the people that I connect with and I network with and are in the same space that I am found a lot of the stuff later. So
Well, I was one of those that found it later. It was, if you like, it was my lifeline. And I found it because a lady that I started working with was going to a spiritualist church. She started me on the pathway. And when I started sitting with the medium, I sat with the medium every week in a circle, and we were being taught to do different things. I even levitated out of my chair one night on a meditation because I didn't do as I was told. But yeah. So you can levitate. I'm here to vouch. You can actually levitate. But the lady that I was sitting with wanted to teach me tarot cards, or she wanted to teach the class tarot cards. So she did a workshop, and the workshop included having to buy a deck of tarot cards. I went to the one session of the workshop, went home and threw the tarot cards in the bin. Yeah, not many people know that. So they all know it now. I went home, threw them in the bin, and thought, it's not for me. I wasn't ready for that responsibility. I was going through that healing process. I was on that pathway, getting ready for that self-awareness. In my self-awareness course, I met another lady who was going to hold a tarot card workshop. So I said to my friend who'd started me off on this pathway, you wanted to learn tarot. I know somebody that does it. She said, well, you're coming with me. I said, no, I'm not. I don't like them. And she said, yes, you are. And I was sort of frog marched to this tarot card workshop. And the rest is history. I read the tarot cards, my friend doesn't. The universe stepped in. The universe has strange ways of teaching us lessons and getting us to be in the right place at the right time when we are open to it.
wow. That's
Because as sad as it was about my first husband's death, I wouldn't be able to do what I do now with as much experience if I had left my second husband and gone back to my first husband. I certainly wouldn't have had the husband that I've got, and I certainly wouldn't have my daughter or my son. So, these things are there for reasons, but it's not until you open up to that sort of thinking that you realise these things do happen for a reason. And we never meet people for no reason. People that cross our pathways are for a reason. Either we're going to help them or they're going to help us, or it may be a bit of both.
Wow. I feel like on most of these podcast episodes, my responses are normally wow or oh my god. I try and work on that, guys. It's normally because I'm just like gobsmacked, like lost for words completely.
But some fantastic things have happened in my life as well, Andrew, so as not to dwell on depression, because as I was coming out of my depression, my son decided he'd had enough and told me I wasn't his mum and went off on his merry way. And now I had two choices. I could have gone running after him and pleaded with him to come home, which I had done during his teenage years, but I didn't. I stuck my ground and sort of made it clear that if he wanted to come home, the door was open, and I never chased him. So that went on for 10 years with my father nagging me that I was the adult, I should be chasing my son and getting him to come home and all this BS, as you say. And the universe made it that I was actually in my dad's flat, where my son and his partner and his little boy, he's now got a little girl as well, but when those three came in to the flat, I was there. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me because there was no exit other than one door, which they were coming through. So I had to put my big girl's pants on and take the role of being mum to him again and talk to him. And after a few months, my son
Okay, so obviously before we had, guys, I'm going to be very honest with you, we had some technical issues, but we're back because I like being very open and honest with my audience. So before the little like breakdown, I think we call it a breakdown or whatever they call it in podcast terms, I never know, because a lot of people use cameras with SD cards, so they'll use it as breakdown time to reload the cards. That's what we just had. We were just reloading the internet. But you said about your son, his partner, and your grandson turning up at your dad's house. So what happened? What kind of... Because I can't imagine doing that.
As I said, I wanted to run, but I didn't. I made them a cup of tea. And I spoke to my son and basically reiterated what I'd been telling my dad for years, that I loved him to bits, but I wasn't going to chase him. If he wanted me, he knew where I was. And over the next few months, he communicated with me. And because of networking, I came up to Bristol to do some foresights, or in the Bristol area, which is where my son lives. And he arranged to meet me for coffee, only he didn't arrange to meet me for coffee. He gave me his address. And I've been visiting him and his partner and my grandson and now my beautiful granddaughter ever since. And it's just as if nothing ever happened. So, it's a happy ending. But it could have been so different, because if I'd forced him to come back when my dad wanted me to, I could still be forcing him. The door would be opening and shutting all the time. Whereas now I feel that it's open and it's going to stay that way. It is, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but also from that, from an external kind of perspective like that, if you actually think about it along the lines of, if you had chased after him, got him to come home, he might not have met his partner, might not have had the grandchildren, like all those kind of things that happen. So I bet your dad now probably turns around and says, well done.
No, he doesn't, because I still cannot do anything that my dad will praise.
Okay.
I am still made to feel as if I'm a bit of mech on the bottom of his shoe. Let's put it that way.
Okay. I feel like if I don't send this to your dad, but I don't want to meet him. I don't think he's my people.
He phones me up on stupid things, and he expects me to jump through hoops for him. Unfortunately, he followed me to Wales and lives just down the road from me, and it's very difficult. But it's good in one way, because I've also seen the way that he treated me. He now treats my daughter, or tries to. He doesn't get away with it with her because he's her grandfather, not her father. And although she loves and respects him, she'll answer him back. Whereas I wouldn't, because he was my dad. And in my days, you didn't answer your parents back. Children were seen and not heard, if you like.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of the fact that my daughter will stand up for herself.
See, I never know whether my family are going to listen to this. I know my grandparents won't, but I'm very much not the same. But my grandparents that are still alive are my dad's parents. They are very much of that situation of children are seen and not heard. And then you get my sister, who is a HR specialist and law degree, and you've got me that have NLP teaching. I specialised in philosophy and values during my undergraduate as well. So trying to make us not argue back just makes us argue back more. And it's quite interesting because obviously we'll argue back with my dad because it's just how we work.
But that's exactly how I work with my father now.
Yeah.
He doesn't get away with it now like he did when I was younger. So although he tries to trigger, the trigger doesn't pull anymore. It doesn't fire any bullets anymore. I'm pleased to say.
Yeah, I think there's been a few occasions with my grandparents. I think one of them was Christmas in 2012, I want to say. We were up in Scotland on like a little Christmas getaway, and we were sat around the table having lunch on one of the days we were up there, and my sister made a comment about something political, and I don't have any care nor interest in politics in any form. Love the little pictures for the logos. I'm not going to out myself on here and say that's how I vote, but there we go. I just did, but there we go. So basically, don't count my vote, please, because any votes I make are not based on knowledge. She made a comment, and I think it was a comment against what my grandma follows politically, and she basically had a massive go at my sister, saying that she was making sweeping statements and stuff like this. So my sister stormed out of this little cottage that we had in Scotland, and my grandma turned around and was like, well, why is she upset? And I'm like, pardon? And it's like, even now, I'll have debates with her about things, and she turned around and was like, oh, I do love our little arguments, Andrew. And I'm like, yeah, because no one else wants to do it. My other three cousins are very much seen and not heard, whereas me and my sister are very confident in ourselves of that respect, of we'll just say it how it is. I did that as a teenager, though.
Still an adult.
But before
Once
that point...
you're 16...
This is true.
Once you're 16, in my eyes, you're an adult.
But also, I did it a lot before I was diagnosed with ADHD, so that's my excuse now. So if anyone's like, you were a little, ass when you were a child, I'm like, sorry, I had ADHD and I wasn't diagnosed. And I shouldn't use it as a crutch or, an excuse. But, when it works, it works. And I love having
my
ADHD.
father uses his dementia now as his crutch.
Obviously,
so
when we did the little breakdown, we had a quick chat about Relate and the services you used with Relate. Hello? Hello. I'm just gonna. Oh, there we go. It removed it anyway. I get very confused. I'll be able to.
It suddenly didn't like me.
Yeah, no. Given gamers this morning, I think it might be worth checking with your internet provider. I might leave this in because that might be quite interesting. I might not. I probably won't because I was still sat here like, hello. We might leave that in. It could be interesting.
If you've seen the signal of my internet, it's quite high. So I don't know why it decides to kick me out every now and then.
Maybe the computer needs an update.
Possibly. I might invest in a new one.
Could be. Might be a nice little. We're out of lockdown and all that. Like, get yourself a new laptop.
Yeah.
Which is ironic since you'll be out more, but anyway. So
I can put it against my business.
Yes, literally, and I'm obviously we're still recording, so I'm hoping HMRC don't listen to this, but I'm hoping to go to NerdCon, which is obviously the like.
I know. I heard you this morning. You don't need to record it, Andrew. I heard.
Okay, cool, and like loophole. Well, not loophole. It's relevant, but yes. Before the glitch again, relate. So obviously we've worked out which relate it was, and it was Relate Avon, and they publicised themselves as the relationship. So I'll link those down below because their description is that all sorts of people come to Relate and find it helps them to understand what's going on in their relationship and change things for the better. So I'd quite like to somewhat delve into that one, I think, as well, because obviously I don't know whether their remit changed as it went on, but did you see them as a single person?
Well, I can't answer that because I was married. So, but I seen them. I seen the lady whose name was Sue. She no longer works for them. She'd retired by the time I seen the other counsellor. I seen her because I was diagnosed with depression, not postnatal depression, and she helped me with my depression. But she also talked to me and my husband about our relationship because obviously, when you're depressed, it's not only you that suffer. Your family suffers as well. I've already mentioned I shouted and screamed at my children. I shouted and screamed at my husband, and if I lost my temper, I'd throw whatever was in my hand at my husband. You know, there's lots and lots of things that it will bleed into. The person with the depression doesn't act as you would expect a normal person to act. I mean, my husband and I had an argument when my daughter was about 3, I think, and I upended a chip pan onto a hot stove. The top of the stove wasn't on, but the stove was hot because the oven was on. And I ended up in the hospital because I sliced my hand in half because my husband's reaction was to push me away from the stove. But instead of going backwards, I went sideways and went straight through a glazed door. So I ended up with a cut on my ear, which was bleeding like mad, and a big slice in my hand, which wasn't bleeding hardly at all. So yes, it affects other people. It's not just you. It's not just you. And people are frightened to mention that they can see these things in you that don't seem to be of the nature that you have been before. And that is the only real thermometer, if you like, that we've got that can test. You know, if somebody needs to tell you that you're acting completely different than you did before. In the same way that my daughter didn't like it when I changed, I needed people to tell me that I wasn't acting as I should have been acting for a person of my age. That I needed somebody that needed to talk to me and find out why I had such an attitude and why I had such a big chip on my shoulder. And it was never mentioned. My parents just would tell me it's all in your head.
Whoa.
Which, yes, in some degree it is. That's where it begins. But they didn't do anything to clear those thoughts out of my mind either. So.
Interesting. That's an I could talk about, like, and looking at their website, it is very, like, I've never heard of psychosexual therapy. No idea. I might have to look into it to see what it is. But yeah, no, how? And
But when you think about it, even if we're single, we're in a relationship.
True.
You can relate to that, and I will explain what I mean, as not all of our listeners and watchers will know what I meant there. But the way that I believe these days is I am a spiritual being having a human experience. So within me, there is a being, and there's me, and we're married, if you like. And we're married for life, because that being is with me for life. It's been with me since the day I was born, and it will not leave me till the day I die. And so we have a relationship with ourselves. So I would have thought they could have helped anybody.
Yeah.
That's my own personal opinion.
Oh, yeah. I think it's just some of the wording's throwing me off. But that's because I'm not familiar with them and their offering. So it's new to me. But they are a registered charity as well, so that's quite cool. And I love the fact that the place you got the support is still there today. Like,
yes.
And looking on their website, they've been doing this in this same building for 70 years, which is phenomenal. And they don't look to be, like, regressed in time. They seem to have progressed as time's gone on. So quite interested in that. I'm going to have to do a bit more stalking on that one. Because until today, I'd never heard of them. Which is a bit crazy. But what am I... Oh, no, I just clicked the wrong button. One of the things that I wanted to ask as well is if anyone wanted to... And normally I do this at the end, and once I check the timings and stuff, this may or may not be the... So that is... Okay. Sorry, I'm just checking something. I probably will edit this little bit out. 30 minutes. Okay. So, I'm probably going to call it. So, can you tell the listeners, watchers, where to find you online? Any things you want to mention at the end? Because I know we've covered a lot of ground, and I think I'm tempted to say we'll get you back for another episode at a later date, because I feel like there's so much that it's just unfair to try and condense that down into one episode. What would be your kind of ending remark or something that you'd want the listeners and watchers to really take away with them?
I'd really like them to stop and think, because very often, and I've been there, when we're depressed, we feel like ending it all. Life is precious. Whether we feel it or not, life is precious. Please, if you feel like ending it, before you do anything, reach out to somebody like Andrew or myself, or one of the links that Andrew's going to put up, because life is worth living. I'm here. I'm happy. You know, I could have ended it several times. I was lucky I wasn't killed when my ex-husband tried to. And I can tell you a few times I've put my head in the oven, but I didn't have the courage to do it. And it is courage to take your own life, but life is too precious, too precious. Just think, I went on and had 2 wonderful children, and now I've got grandchildren. And, you know, my mum once said, there's nothing to bring children into this world for. There's plenty to bring this children into this world for. And it's for people who are strong enough to believe in themselves. Nobody else has to believe in you. I found that out the hard way. Believe in yourself, and others will believe in you too. And that's what I'd like to leave them with.
Oh, I love it. So, to follow on from that, if they wanted to reach out to you instead of me, because you never know, It's probably likely that they'll want to reach out to you rather than me. But what are your links, your hashtags or tags on social media? Where can they find you?
They can find me by putting the hashtag, or they can find me by putting in Kay Downie, the Soul Mechanic, on Facebook and on LinkedIn. I'm even on YouTube, though at the moment that's a baby channel at the moment for me. And I can also be found on Instagram, all under the name of Kay Downie, the Soul Mechanic. Or they can contact me via my website, which is, again, kaydownie.co.uk. It's all my name.
Love it.
Very easy to find.
We love simple branding, but not simple branding, because anyone that's not watching the video, get your butts on YouTube and look at the roller banner behind Kay. It's literally a little mechanic. I love it. It's brilliant. There will be I'll put the logos everywhere as well. People will see it throughout the whole thing. So I absolutely love it. And thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Kay, for coming on. Hopefully, with all the technicals, we'll get it all sorted. I'm sure it'll be fine. Yes, do guys follow, connect with Kay on all of the different socials. They will all be linked below because I will do a little stalk and get them. But that has been the University Support and Success podcast with your host, Andrew Porteous, our lovely guest, Kay Downie, the Soul Mechanic. Search it. And I will see you on the next one, which I'm not going to tell you who the next guest is because there's a couple and I don't know the order yet, but also I like to keep it a surprise. So I'll see you on the next one, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, morning, if you are watching this at different times of the day or listening to it. But also remember, if you want to get early access to the video format of this, it comes out before the audio. So the early access comes out on the Saturday before the Sunday. So you get it a day earlier than everyone else for £5 a month. But otherwise, you can listen to it on a Sunday on most of your podcast platforms or watch it on YouTube on the Mondays. And it comes out every fortnight. So I will see you on the next one, hopefully. Keep smiling. And remember, life can be lonely, but now you have us.